Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers, sisters and friends. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Welcome to this one-on-one big discussion with our brother Yusuf Patel from SRE Islamic. Assalamu alaikum, Yusuf.
Wa alaikum salam.
Everyone's been talking about what happened in Parliament yesterday and in the run-up to that. And we titled this discussion, Is the Sex Education Battle Lost/Over? But before we get into what exactly happened, you've been quite busy recently, haven't you?
Yeah, alhamdulillah, it's the Muslim community have responded in a really big way, alhamdulillah, and so we're getting requests to go around the country speaking to communities about this issue, and supporting and advising parents on how to really challenge some of this stuff, how to influence what's happening in schools, and really some guidance as to what we can do as a community to deal with this issue.
So what have you been talking about? Have you been going around kind of pushing your opinion on people, or radicalizing people, for want of a better word?
Well, I think it takes one to know one, but actually no, I think what we've really been doing is because it's quite a complex area, and I think it's very difficult for most people to navigate. The changes are quite complex, and there's a lot of detail involved. So we try and clarify what the detail is, what's changing, what the current situation is, what the future changes are from September 2020, what's likely to happen in your school from September 2019, and basically what sort of things they teach in school and how we can try and influence what's being taught in school as parents.
So let me get this straight. Yesterday in Parliament, correct me if I'm wrong, yesterday in Parliament they were discussing some new guidelines to update the teaching, the statutory teaching of sex education, relationships education, which hasn't been updated since the year 2000. Is that correct?
Yes, I think one thing is very important to say is that first of all, these subjects were made statutory in 2017 in the Children and Social Work Act of 2017. So it's March 2017. We're nearly 2 years down the line, 2 consultations down the line. And so now the government yesterday, what it did, there was a few pieces of paperwork that came out. One was the revised. One was the response to the consultation that took place in November. So actually, one interesting thing is that the government said in a written answer, in an answer that was lots of MPs were asking a couple of months ago, when is the government going to respond to the consultation? When is the new guidance coming out? When are the regulations coming out, the new regulations coming out? And the government said these will be out in spring 2019. And I know we've got very seasonable weather at the moment, and it seems like we are in spring, but in reality the government brought forward these announcements or these guidance documents. So there's a guidance document which actually looks very similar, almost duplicate to the draft guidance that came out back last July. So there's very little has changed in that, apart from the font size. I think they're aiming at people with visual problems to try and make it easier for them to read. So there's very little of substance that's changed in the draft guidance. The consultation response, which actually showed that a lot of parents were really opposed to a lot of the measures, and the government had to acknowledge that there was a wide scale, a broad section of parents who were very much against a lot of what was going to be tabled, but the government really ignored all of that and decided to continue on its path, making relationship education statutory and relationship and sex education statutory in both primary schools and in secondary schools.
Well, I listened to the debate or whatever you call it, that was happening yesterday, about 45 minutes or so.
Yes.
And they were basically talking about, this hasn't been updated since 19 years ago. So that's before, the proliferation of social media, of abuse that kids might be lured into online, of sexting, all this kind of stuff. So why not? Isn't it time to update this kind of stuff? What is it that you're against and that you're informing?
I think really what's important is that the government has when this when it's really important that when in 2017 when this was passed, a Conservative MP made a statement that was actually very concise and to the point. He said this is a state takeover of parenting, and that's essentially what it is. Parents are seen in law as the primary educators of their children. They're seen as the one, as their first and primary educators of their children. And so what the government has done is it's taken away what is essentially a parent's right to teach the children their values, and said, no, actually, we're going to define which values your children are taught in school, and really you've got no say in that.
But in the debate yesterday, they were talking about parents still having the opportunity to opt their kids out of these classes, where they're presumably concerned that someone else is going to teach other kind of maybe religious or moralistic kind of values about relationships and sexual behaviours.
I think the point to make there is that in primary schools, parents have, the government has said that relationship education in primary schools is not meant to replace sex and relationship education. So schools can still teach about sex and relationship education. The problem is, in primary schools, the government haven't clearly defined the difference between what is sex education and what is relationship education. Secondly, in secondary schools, parents, first of all, the government guidelines state that parents will be able to withdraw from sex education aspect of RSE, relationship sex education, but not the relationship aspect. Now, the government hasn't clearly outlined what is the distinction between sex education and relationship and sex education parts of the curriculum. Rather, the whole curriculum has been outlined. The learning outcomes are all interwoven with each other. So now a school can say and argue to parents, actually, you want to take your children out from this lesson. Actually, this is considered to be relationship education. It's not sex education. And who is the parent then to argue back and say, no, that is actually sex education?
Why do you think they've done that?
First, I think really what came out in the debate yesterday, and actually a lot of MPs made very, very sensible points, and very clear points, and the questions were, some of the questions were very clear and needed clear answers. And in response, the government, Nick Gibb in response, really didn't give clear answers. For example, one of the questions was, why doesn't the government clearly state what the position is if a parent has not been consulted and the school decides to go ahead with what they're going to teach? Who can the parents complain to? In the last guidance document that was published in 2000, it required parents to be consulted, and parents haven't been really consulted in schools. So in the new guidance, parents have been consulted. Who do we go to if a parent says, I've not been consulted, I need to be consulted? Who do we go to? And so the Nick Gibb said that it should be escalated to Department of Education. It could be escalated to a local authority or the regional schools commissioner. And the reality is, sometimes in the past when parents have escalated their concerns to these bodies, they've just been ignored. So now, are you going to give more statutory responsibility to these bodies to respond to these concerns, or are you just going to say, just escalate it further? When there's one of the MPs mentioned, Shabana Mahmood, mentioned that the reality is that the issue of the Equalities Act has pitted minorities against each other. So some minorities and their rights have been elevated over other minorities and their rights, even though the religion and sexual orientation are both protected characteristics. So who's to arbitrate over which trumps the other? And the government had no clear answer to that. So in the absence of clarity from government, schools are going to arbitrate over what fits in, or filling in the gaps. And Ofsted made it very clear, and Manus Spielman made it very clear, that schools will have to teach children LGBT values, and parents will have to just have to accept that, really.
So I mean, you mentioned LGBT values now.
Yeah.
That's, I think, one of the big issues that many people have had with this whole saga. If you just joined us, dear brothers and sisters, we're with Yusuf Patel from SRE Islamic. If you want to get involved in the conversations, please do put your comments and questions in the dialogue box below, or you can email them to inquiries@islam21c.com, and we'll put them we'll discuss them here with Yusuf, inshallah. Now, LGBT stuff, gender, a lot of this is what's maybe made the headlines for the Muslim kind of social media sphere. This morning, people, even yesterday, spreading information saying, the government saying that teachers are gonna, teach un-Islamic things to kids in classrooms, and what happened yesterday means that, whatever you do, your kids, if they're in a normal school, they're gonna have lessons about, it's perfectly, or normalizing certain things like, same-sex marriage and these types of things that most Muslims probably are against. Is this true, or is this a bit of a sensationalist spin on yesterday?
I think obviously the guidance document very clearly states that schools will have the ability to decide on when they teach these subjects, LGBT type values. Schools will have the absolute right to determine that, but it is expected that schools should teach this when children are ready. So schools have been given, first of all, schools have been given the ability to make that decision, but it's not acceptable for schools to go, for a child to go through the whole of the primary schooling without being taught these things. And I think there's a real distinction that needs to be made here, that we acknowledge that we live in a society where people from different backgrounds exist, and we acknowledge that that sometimes that there are people who may have lifestyles that we disagree with, and so the law in the past accepted that people should not discriminate, or should not incite hatred, should not cause violence to or insult people from a different background on account of that background characteristic. But this is going further than that. It's more than about bullying and acceptance that we should live together without conflict. But what we're required to do now is almost accept certain values as normal. Like, for example, as Muslims, we don't want other people to mistreat us or to discriminate against us, or to say if you've applied for a job and your name is Abdul, that you're going to be disadvantaged because of your religious background. And the law has some measures in place to stop that from happening. How effective that is another matter, but that's what the claim is. Now, the law doesn't say to any individual, you've got to accept the Muslim's belief and their practice and their values. And I wouldn't expect any non-Muslim to accept my values, because that's a point of disagreement. And I wouldn't expect children in schools to be forcibly taught these values and almost to enact these values.
If they have a Muslim teacher, for example.
Yeah, the Muslim teacher in a school shouldn't be saying to a child, you, Jonathan, you actually could be a Muslim. So tomorrow, make sure before 6 o'clock you pray Fajr. Say after me Fajr. 2 rakats of Fajr. And then in the day, when it comes to lunchtime, after you have your dinner, you're going to do Dhuhr. And then Asr, Maghrib, Isha. So have your halal meat and don't eat bacon, because that's not allowed for Muslim. And you are a Muslim, Jonathan. And I'm going to rename you Abdullah. That would be unacceptable in a school. But teachers whose private lives are from a particular background are allowed to go into schools and to teach the children about their values, and children from those backgrounds are being told it's acceptable. So in what's happening in Birmingham, in Parkfield School, the teacher there is telling children it's okay to be Muslim and gay. Now,
it's normal. He used the word normal.
So basically, it's like you can say that, okay, there's some people who are Muslim, but they also identify as having same-sex attraction, so they call themselves gay. Okay, that's two things. So they have one characteristic, another characteristic. There could be a Muslim who drinks, and that goes against their belief, but they're Muslim and they drink. But you can't say that it's acceptable for a Muslim to be a Muslim and to drink, and to say that is acceptable. Similarly, you can't say a Muslim who engages in same-sex relations is normal or acceptable. But children are being taught, and it's not just that Parkfield schools, other schools as well, where we heard from parents who are children are coming home, and the children are being told that, look, you are Muslim, but there's also Muslims in this society who are also gay, so it's fine for you to be Muslim and gay. It's in Parkfield School, children were being told to reenact gay pride marches. Now, imagine if a Muslim teacher had done something where children were doing Hajj, the Tawaf, around the Kaaba in the classroom. There would be widespread anger at that, and understandably so, because a teacher should not impose their personal values upon children.
I mean, when we were younger, right? You went to school here, I went to school, we were born and raised here.
Yeah.
We had this thing where, okay, we're Muslims, this is how we do things.
Yeah.
You know, lunchtime, we don't eat the bacon, we don't do the whole girlfriend and boyfriend thing, we don't drink alcohol. Now there were some Muslims that might have done that, maybe in order to kind of
fit in
and that kind of stuff. But we had this clear thing that this is something we do and this is something, you know, non-Muslims do.
Yeah.
Why can't we just continue that stuff? So, you know, Muslims, they have these kind of, you know, our in terms of our what is appropriate in our worldview. This is a you know, a marriage and nikah, and there has to be these conditions and so forth. Are you saying that it's no longer acceptable to just say, it's not going to be any longer acceptable to just say this is how Muslims do things and this is how others do things?
We can say that, but in schools that's not the spin that is used. That's not acceptable for that to be acknowledged in a school environment. That you know, when the Ofsted when Ofsted head Amanda Spielman talked about faith schools, she was not even talking about normal schools, faith schools. Faith schools are expected to teach children about same-sex relationships. And other communities, for example, the Jewish community, the Haredi community, one member of the Haredi community who I met the other day, he's taking the Department of Education to court because he's arguing that there's nothing in law which allows or which mandates them to talk about these subjects in the way that it's been interpreted. And so there is widespread disquiet about these issues, but the reality is that we can teach our children whatever we want at home, and we should speak about these issues with our children. But when they go to school, we should acknowledge that they will be taught a different understanding of these issues. I spoke to a parent, and a child was being told in school that you're a boy and you could be a girl, and that if your parents don't agree with that, we'll support you in your decision. So it's like these are young minds which are vulnerable, and they're being taught by teachers. The children got a very good relationship with their teachers. They look up to them. They see them as authority figures. We in our community always say, respect your teacher. You know, teachers keep giving you knowledge. You need to treat them well. You need to treat them with respect. But then the teacher then says something which can be very impressionable to a child and puts a suggestion in the mind of a child where their identity is the very sex is being questioned. Okay, I may be a girl. You know, I like hanging around with boys, so maybe I may be gay. You know, these suggestions are being told to children, and I think the point is that the reality is what we mentioned before. What you mentioned is that when we send our children to school, we expect them to be educated and not indoctrinated, and that's the problem with education. The whole value system around education has changed. The whole understanding of what education is there to achieve has changed, such that now we have RE and RSC in schools, and the guidance clearly says that the emphasis upon these subjects need to be taught in such a way that they should be taught with such vigor and with such emphasis that there should be no distinction between how that is taught and how English and maths and science are taught. And
that seems to be the one major problem. It appears some people are unable to separate between the facts, right? Between here's the science, here are objective facts. This is what happens. This is the science. This is what some people do, right? And this is the law, same-sex marriage and so forth, recognized under X, Y, Z. And they're unable to separate the facts from the actual moralistic dimension, the values dimension, right? The ideological constructs of what is appropriate, what is good, what is sinful, what is. So they're unable to distinguish between the illegal and the sinful, or the morally right and wrong. It's legal to do loads of things. It's not necessarily ethical or beautiful, right? And I found this kind of repeating itself time and again in the debates or in some of the very kind of shallow slogans around these issues.
It's interesting that yesterday that brings to mind one of the MPs said yesterday was that she was saying that these whole subjects are there to teach children about committed, loving relationships, and so the children can understand what committed, loving relationships are. First of all, when you hear that phrase, you think, "Wow, that sounds really good. That's a laudable objective to fulfill." But what is the definition of a committed, loving relationship? That will look like 10 different things to 10 different people, because it's not something which is objective, an objective reality that everybody can agree upon. It's really fundamentally based upon how you view life, how you view relationships, how you view good and bad and right and wrong, or whether you understand that good and bad has any part to play in it. So fundamentally, if you go walk out in the street and say to people, what is a loving relationship, there will be fundamentally different answers to that question. So you can't just argue that we're teaching something which everybody is in agreement over. There's a huge amount of disagreement about what constitutes that. We would say a marriage between a man and a woman constitutes a loving, committed relationship.
Just like anything, you'd expect a Muslim who's, understands certain things about the reason why they're here and their relationship with their creator and their relationship with other beings and so forth. That person has, a certain set of ideals, a certain set of, principles, ethics, values and so forth. You wouldn't expect them to always be in line with whatever's popular or whatever your neighbor even might be upon. That's why we have lakum dinukum waliya din. To use your way and to me is mine. Right? To agree to disagree. It seems that this simple principle, although we take it for granted, it's some people are unable to just agree to disagree that someone else has a different view of the world, view of relationships, view of just things like love. What is love, right? What is an appropriate relationship? Some people have a different view to them, and this is, and in essence, that is the real. It appears to be the real intolerance. Right. If you're trying to force your particular conception of what is normal, what is appropriate, what is good, right, onto someone else, and this is. It's a bit silly that this is being this enforcement is being branded as somehow tolerance of diversity and that kind of stuff. True diversity is to accept that someone else would have a different belief to you, different idea of what is appropriate, what is inappropriate, what is beautiful, what is ugly, what is normal, what is abnormal, and so forth. And these aren't, and it appears that for some people. Philosophically, even from in a Western European sense, it's very difficult for them to navigate the difference between what is and what ought to be. The fact and the value, a dimension of something.
It's like interesting things that I was reading. The Parkfield deputy head teacher in Birmingham, Andrew Moffat. I was reading his book called No Outsiders, and so his understanding is that in this school. There should be no outsiders. Nobody should be outside. Everybody should be accepted for whatever background they come from, whether it's religious background, sexual orientation, or whether their gender, or any of the protected characteristics. And he gave one example of a situation that happened in one of his schools. And he said that there was a rugby player who came into the school, Gareth Thomas, and he's a gay rugby player. So as part of the assembly, before the assembly, first of all, he played rugby with the children for most of the day, and then in the afternoon they had an assembly. And the assembly was geared around the question: talk about something or name something which you don't expect, you don't know about, or you're surprised by me telling you about myself. And so he was told, Andrew Moffat told Gareth Thomas, say to everybody, "I'm gay." So Gareth Thomas said to all the children, "I'm gay." One child gave a gasp, in response when he heard that, and Andrew Moffat said that child he called the child a homophobe, and he said that child I'm glad it was only one child, because that child was isolated and that child was the outsider. So on the one hand, you say there should be no outsiders. He didn't go to any length to explain the reason why that child made that comment, but he made a value judgment about that child's opinion from a gasp. And so the reality is that you can say there's no outsiders, but if some children are being placed as outsiders in the school because they come from backgrounds that believe certain things, not that I'm going to attack you or I hate you or discriminate against you, but I don't agree with your lifestyle choice, just like you may not agree with my lifestyle choice. So we can live together, we can live in our community together, we can work together, we can be neighbours together, and we can brush along in a society that we live in, but we don't have to agree with every single lifestyle choice that each of us makes.
Or even your beliefs of, you know, what
Yeah.
is an appropriate
Yeah.
action or
Yeah. Yeah.
relationship and so forth.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
these are realms of within the realms of ideological and social
Yes.
constructs.
Yes.
Even the notion of sexuality itself, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I have an issue with the way even Muslims, we kind of adopt a very particular Western kind of a European history of the notion of sexuality, like there are discrete categories.
Yeah.
You're either heterosexual, homosexual, or bisexual. This is something, you know, this is some 18th or 19th century categorization, which even, you know, post-structuralists today, queer theorists, some of them who even identify themselves as gay, they say this is just made up of, it's discourse that creates this. It's a social construct.
Yeah.
And we have kind of fit into this, using this terminology, when Islamically, if we look at Islam through our own lens, we don't have this distinction, that we don't believe in these European kind of notions and constructs of something called sexuality, and that is something deterministic, something, you know, predetermined, and people are forced into this, right? But that's just one example. I mean, that's a discussion for a different day. In terms of the SRE, right, and yesterday's debate and so forth, what is it that you're telling, what is your message to Muslim parents in particular?
Firstly, I think it's very important that sometimes when, you know, when things that we work for or work to achieve don't come about. So we say, for example, there's a law going through Parliament and we're opposed to that law. The law gets passed, and the natural consequence of that sometimes is that people become very disheartened and very apathetic and very, look, this is the end of the world. And I think it's really important that even though things happen that don't go our way, it doesn't mean we should be like that. We should be so disheartened, and because realization is that you know, for every situation for a believer is good, and there is good in every situation, whether we can see or not. You know, the issue is here is that so many people have woken up about the reality of the values that are being imposed upon our children, and the need almost to, as parents, respond to that. And so many people have woken up. Even if that were to be the only result of this coming to pass, then that would be a positive thing. So those people who have responded to the situation that's happening to our children, and have done actions, really, jazakumullah khairan for that. But keep going, because it's not the end of the struggle. There's still the regulations haven't been passed, so it's not a done deal. We can still speak to MPs and say to them, look, you need to represent our views as constituents.
And what in your opinion, what should a Muslim parent, for example, I going to see my MP now?
Yeah.
What do I tell him?
Well, say to him, look, these regulations are going to be passed. Yeah, it could be within the next week or within the coming weeks. The regulations that will make the guidance and statutory, that this is something that's placed on a statutory footing. All of those. What you need to do is recognize that if the law states I am the primary educator of my children, then why is it that I am not allowed to withdraw in primary school or in secondary school, or in secondary school I've got a limited right to withdraw? Why is it that the government hasn't clarified the difference between sex education and relationship education, both in primary schools and in secondary schools? Without this clarity, the state has really taken over what essentially is my role to raise my children. So I want you to reject these regulations, so that the government goes back to back to the start and think about the impact these regulations will have upon the impact these new changes will have upon our children. That's one thing we need to do. But other thing is recognizing that schools are going to start teaching this subject from 2019, although it's statutory from 2020. The government has said to schools, start teaching it early, because then you can ensure that things are in place by 2020. So really speak to schools today and say to your children's school, look, this is going to happen, and I know maybe that you're being forced into positions that maybe you don't want to do. Maybe, and the guidance actually says that we as parents need to be part of the process in deciding on how it's being taught, the resources that are being used. Help us to help you. Bring us in as part of the process as early as possible. Help us to shape the resources, because you don't want conflict.
Another thing to speak to your MP about, or
no, that's
the
MP. The MP is one thing, but the head teacher is another thing. So we can't just stop. There's two fronts. One is still speaking to your MP and saying to them, look, you need to represent my interests, and I'm unhappy with the result, and you need to still push for the right of parents to withdraw.
A lot of Muslim mums and dads have been doing this, right?
Yeah, but keep on at MPs. Now, obviously, there's a difference between a debate in Parliament, which has been triggered by 100,000 petitions, which has no impact other than for creating awareness, and not every MP would attend such a event. But a vote in Parliament on these regulations, we expect all MPs to be there. So those who were not there yesterday should be there when the regulations are being passed. So speak to your MP and say you need to be there and you need to represent our interests and reject the regulations, because the impact on our children as a result, if you don't do that, will be great, and the right of parents to raise their children as they so wish will be undermined.
So, can you explain, as the law stands now, is a parent entitled to remove their kid from any class, even like maths?
No, they're not.
Is that not? How do you reconcile that with the law seeing the parents as the primary educator?
Because fundamentally, they were never able to remove their children from maths, but they were able because the government recognised this is a specific area that is linked fundamentally to fundamental values. Because maths, maths is a subject which a Christian, someone who's Jewish, somebody's Hindu, somebody's Sikh.
Maths is it's about facts.
Yes,
right?
and so there will be no disagreement over what maths is, and nobody will say, I don't want my children to learn about fractions. Fractions are indecent. They wouldn't say that. They would say we accept the maths, science, geography. Nobody's going to say I don't want my children learning about the Western Hemisphere. There's a recognition that these are about facts. These are about things which are indisputable. But when we talk about values, there's going to be a difference between the values that I believe in as opposed to atheist, as opposed to an agnostic, as opposed to a humanist or secularist. There's going to be a wide variety of differences depending upon your philosophical perspective. And so we don't expect, this distinction was ensured and was recognized by governments in the past. And they said parents as a result need to decide on whether they include their children in this or not. So the fact that it's a different thing to say that if the right to withdraw never existed and it remains the same, but the status has changed, so there's a huge difference now. A right that parents had in the past has been taken away. So now the government has to prove why you took it. The onus is upon them to prove taking it away is in the best interest of parents and children. But fundamentally, yesterday's debate, a lot of MPs were saying that fundamentally we need to recognise the rights of children. Well, why just the rights of children? Why not the rights of parents? Yeah, in other aspects of life, I remember when I was at school, and still to this day, if a child had a headache, the school couldn't just give a paracetamol to a child. Yeah, they'd have to get permission from the head teacher. Even a plaster, putting a plaster on a cut. It was not something as simple as you could just give a child a plaster. But in terms of, because they recognise that parents are the primary educators, and whilst the children are at school, the teachers are almost substitute teachers in loco parentis. They are there to substitute parents while they're there, but they're not replacing them. And so
you're saying basically, okay, with this section relationship education, this recent kind of hysteria many of us have been kind of subjected to, you're saying the struggle here is not over. Okay,
No.
Muslim needs to do two things.
Yeah.
Number one, speak to your MP to
Yes.
go and represent you,
Yeah.
to demand clarity on the whole opt-in, opt-out stuff, to reject regulations until the impact has been on that is being seen.
Yes.
Number two, speak to your local head teachers.
Yes.
To say work with us to be part of the process
Yeah.
of when it comes to how to roll out these regulations. And
some parents are going to schools and saying we want to help, we want to be a part of that process, and the school saying we don't know what to do. So if a school says that, say, I'll help you then as a parent. If you have knowledge
schools
about
are understaffed.
So say, look, I will help you. You know, let's work together. And I think the school should know that it's best when parents and teachers and school works together, because when they don't work together, you get Parkfield School, isn't it? The parents in conflict with the school, and that's not in anybody's best interest. So I think we need to say to to the heads and to teachers, let us work together from the outset, find something that meets all of our needs. And
so those two things, MPs,
Yes.
head teachers, what else?
So those are the two main things. I think those are two main. But also, I think parents need to start recognizing that, you know, our children live in society, and they are affected by the values, both good and bad, around them. It's impossible for somebody to live in a society that has certain values and they're not impacted by that. All of us are impacted at some level or another, and children, especially who are still forming their identity and forming their values, they're going to be affected even more. So we've got to recognize that we need to start doing a few things. One is recognize that we have an institution that we unfortunately are taking for granted, and that's the family. The institution of the family is something, when other communities look upon the Muslim community, they say, you know, your family structures are still quite intact. Your family structures are really good. You know, we envy you that you still got a level of stability in your community that we don't have. Whilst families are breaking down everywhere else, generally speaking, there are exceptions and it's not perfect. In our community, generally, family is still intact. But we've got to protect that and work to ensure that that remains the case, because it's not by us just thinking it's going to remain the same, that it will remain the same. It's by us taking actions with our children, really spending time with our children, informing their values. You know, doing this action of tarbiyah that's almost become, to a certain extent, a lost art, where parents shouldn't expect others to raise their children.
That's
Parents
how it
should
is.
be doing themselves.
Unfortunately, that's the push from wider society, and that is to outsource all of the functions of what was traditionally carried out by the family, the extended family.
Outsource is a good term, and that's a term that I use sometimes. Is that, you know, if a company outsources its work to another company to do, like for example, you're going to be my call center, so outsources it. It doesn't mean it just hands everything over to that other company. It will still monitor and regulate and still take responsibility for that. Because if it doesn't, then the business is going to die. Because if the quality of that outsourcing isn't in line with your values and isn't going to help you achieve your end goal, that company is going to collapse. Similarly, we can get people to help us in our role. The madrasa teacher, the Muslim, other teachers, other supplementary schools in our community, madrasa, maktabs, and whatever. But we can never outsource the responsibility that we've been given to raise our children by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And outsourcing the responsibility is different from outsourcing the task. And so we need to recognize that we are the role models for our children. We are the ones who set the standard for our behavior to our children. There's a phrase that I always use that it says that values are caught rather than taught. It's the modeling of behavior that we show every day to our children that they will inevitably imitate. And the long lectures we give them will probably not really have a deep impact upon them. But when they see us act in a particular way, that will rub off on them, because that's the nature of how values are generally adopted by others around us. And so we've got to, first of all, think about what we hold. You can't give what you don't have. If we don't have a standard of values that represents our Islam, then how do we expect our children to hold on to those values?
Values are caught rather than taught. I like that. I'm gonna steal that. Inshallah.
But I think it's really important that we take responsibility for all of these things. You know, when I speak to parents all the time, I say to them, look, if you write down all the things you think your children know, I guarantee you they'll know much more than that. It's, you know, we like to look upon our children, even myself, we like to look upon our children as innocent. You know, we still think of them as our even when our children get old, we still, they're our children, they're our babies. You know, we think of them as that innocent baby that was crying, and we were changing their nappies. You know, that belief that they're innocent is almost, it's partly natural, but we have to recognize that there are influences upon our children that we've got to we've got to then recognise and try and work with things.
Now, you're saying struggle's not over, go to your MP, go to your head teacher, don't take your family kind of values and infrastructure for granted, and your institution for granted. What will happen, right, and this is your kind of moment of free reign for any sensationalist hysteria. What's going to happen if Muslims don't do that, in your opinion?
If Muslims don't act to protect the values of our children, it will inevitably end up like other communities who've lived here for a very long time, where the values that they held on at the beginning are no longer held on now. And the reality is,
assimilation.
If we do not, because when the reality is we're fighting for the hearts and minds of our children. This is a battle for the hearts and minds of our children. We can either win or lose that battle. I believe there are many front lines in this battle. Part of that front line is in school, in society, but the main front line is in the home. But if we do not do that, then when we die, are we taking for granted that our children will even pray over us and do janazah for us? Are we going to take it for granted that they'll come and visit our graves and make dua for us? Are we going to take it for granted that all the things we want them to be in terms of that will help us to progress in the akhirah, are we expecting that as of course, or are we investing in that for the future? And so I think the reality is what we're doing here is we are raising children, not just our children, and we're raising not just the next generation, but actually 3 generations down the line. What do we expect the generation 3 generations down the line to be, unless we set the standard now for our children? And I was in a restaurant the other day. I was having a sandwich, and I saw there was a table of a couple of boys and a couple of girls. One of the girls was wearing hijab, and the type of language they were using, effing and blinding, and the things they were talking about. I was thinking, look, these are children who probably they were about maybe 15 or 16 years old, college age, and they were talking as though they were best of friends. The values that we believe is that boys and girls do not sit and talk like that in a very matey way. That's not how interaction should be. And how much do the parents even know about what's going on in those children's lives, and how they are in outside of the home and how they are in the home? And I think we can't take it for granted that our children will end up how we want them to end up. It requires a lot of effort and a lot of dua. It requires a lot of dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the strength and give us children who are guided. And so I think we need to really take action. I speak to sometimes lots of parents who, when their children are grown up and they turn out differently from what they expect, and they say to me, look, I really wasted those years. I spent all that time working,
making money,
and I thought I was doing that for the children, and actually, if I'd spent that extra time with them and spend just talking to them and speaking to them and talking about what they should believe and just basically spending time with them, if I could turn back time, I would change that. But if we are in that opportunity, if we have that opportunity now to interact with our children and mold them, then we should take up that opportunity before it's too late. Because on a deathbed, the reality is you're not going to think about the extra time you spent at work. You're going to think about the extra time you spent in working for your akhirah, including our children who end up sadaqah jariyah, end up to be the ones who, after our death, engage in actions which will be a credit to us. After we've finished with our book of deeds, they'll be able to write upon that book of deeds, because what we teach them and they put into practice will be things which we are benefiting from after our death. So they are our investment in the akhirah. They will carry on living their life, and if we raise them right and pray to Allah that we've done what we can, then there'll be a credit to us.
May Allah preserve the iman and identity of future generations. Ameen. Jazakallah khair, Yusuf. Brothers and sisters and friends at home, I've been told that there was some technical difficulty during the stream, but inshallah this video will be up online as soon as it's recorded and edited, inshallah, and you can join the conversation in the comments below thereafter. And we'll also inshallah invite Yusuf for follow-on discussions, I'm sure, no doubt, inshallah. So just a reminder, the message is the struggle is not over. We have to speak to our MPs to make sure that we have clarity. We make sure that the MPs are working as representatives for us. We want to reject certain regulations until the impact of those are seen and determined, and want to make it clear that the parents are the primary educators of the children, especially when it comes to values and moralistic issues such as relationships and so forth. We want to also speak to our local head teachers. We want to have a good relationship with our schools, normal schools, Islamic schools, faith schools, academies, all of that kind of stuff, because the head teacher should be working with the parents, and when you don't have that good relationship, you can't. It's not in the best interest of the children. And finally, Yusuf said, we need to be very careful and hold dear this precious institution of our family and our values as a community. Other people look up to it, alhamdulillah. And with that, I thank Brother Yusuf. I hope that you'll join us in the future. Jazakumullah khairan. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta wa astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.